This text comes up fairly annually within the Lenten season especially. It is that text that grabs a hold of us to our very understanding of who we are and our identity as Christians. It's a troublesome in some respects. It makes us think and it makes us apply it and it makes us wonder what it means to our daily living. Mark Twain worried about some parts of the Bible. He said, "It ain't those parts of the Bible that I can't understand that bother me. It's the parts that I do understand that bother me." Well, today's gospel is just that sort of part of the Bible. This gospel doesn't need much of explaining, really. It's quite clear, quite simple. This little teaching of Jesus in the 8th chapter is plain to understand, yet it's hard to hold in our heart, and the meaning is inescapable for us. So the gospel writer, Mark, as he put down this gospel, has this at the very center of his gospel writing. Let's see here. Confirmation students, you all remember we've been talking about some of the structure of the Bible, right? And the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark being the shortest of the Gospels, you all remember that part? And with that being the shortest, it's also thought to be the earliest, and also probably the most succinct, the most simple of the Gospels for us to look at. Mark's Gospel is all of 16 chapters long. And in that, verse 1 begins with a bold proclamation, right? The beginning of it's a quote, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is the place where the gospel writer is saying who Jesus is, the Son of God. Okay? From that point on, if you remember these past weeks as we've looked at Mark's gospel, it's been a bit of a marathon, a bit of a race as we went from chapter to chapter and verse to verse. We've had the word immediately regularly used by Mark. He just boom, boom, boom. Things are moving right along for him. Jesus is baptized. He's then tempted by Satan. He heals the multitudes. He feeds the multitude. He cleanses lepers. He exposes false teachers. He tells earthly stories with heavenly meaning. He calms the stormy sea. He exorcises demons so that people are demon-possessed. He multiplies the bread in the hands. He walks on the water. The lame walk, the deaf hear, and the blind see. Jesus even raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. And all of that is in the first 8 chapters of Mark's 16 chapters, the smallest book of the Bible. He goes through all of that, and he gets to this moment, kind of the midpoint, the breaking point in the 8th chapter of Mark's Gospel. Today, in the exact middle here, we find ourselves the furthest away from Jerusalem, the furthest away from Calvary and the cross. You are at the very northern edge of the nation of Israel. Caesarea Philippi is north of the Sea of Galilee, going up what would be the headwaters of the Jordan River. And you're almost into Lebanon at that point. Caesarea Philippi. It's a Roman city. You are as far away from Jerusalem, as far away from the cross as you possibly could be. And as Jesus walks amongst the villages, he turns to his disciples and he asks of them, "Who do people say that I am?" From the very first chapter, in the first verse, it says that he's the Son of God. But from that point on to this point, no one calls him the Christ or the Messiah. Jesus asks of the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And his response, their response is quite logical. Some people say that you're Elijah, the prophet. Others say you're John the Baptist, reincarnated. Others say that you are one of the prophets because you have done all of these things, right, that have taken place up to that point. But nobody yet has called him the Messiah or the Christ. And one thing about that word, by the way, your reading for this here has Messiah. The RSV version has that as Christ, and those are interchangeable for that, and they both mean the anointed of God, okay, the appointed of God. And so just keep that in mind. When you see Christ or Messiah, it's going to mean the same thing. When you come to this part of the gospel here, and you look back, you say, well, who is this Jesus then? Who is he? What has he been a part of? And we can see all these things that he has done and that he has been a part of before us, but we don't know now his purpose as the Christ, the Savior, the Son of God. We come to this point, and it is up to Peter to blurt it out, as it should be, right? Peter's that kind of guy. And he says, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. And I went for the longest time thinking that Peter had nailed it. That this was for all the other stuff that Peter's done, Peter really got it down this time. He dug deep into his heart, and he came up with the right answer. And he says, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah. And everybody's going, yeah. Well, as I have looked into this a little bit further and the like, I kind of found that Peter missed it again. Because Peter's interest in that, and Peter's use of the word Messiah or Christ there, is that he would be the one who would come, who would fulfill what the prophets had previously said. That Jesus would be the one who would bring them down the Roman Empire there, free the people, reinvigorate the society of the Jews for which the nation of Israel would be restored. When Peter says that confession, that's probably what he had in mind. And why do we know that? Because Jesus looked at him and rebuked him for that. You see, Peter rebuked Jesus. Pretty bold move, don't you think, to go over and to go to Jesus, your teacher, your Messiah, the one you call the Christ, and to say, Lord, I don't think you quite got this right. You're not to suffer and to die for this, but rather you should be victorious and powerful over all of these things. But rather it is that you have come as the anointed ones, and that you should be blessed by all of that. It's interesting also in Mark's Gospel that all of the people who you would least expect to get it. I mean, if you look back, who is it that first recognizes Jesus? It's a demon-possessed person in the synagogue. Others, as the Gospel goes on from this point forward, will be the centurion, and others will say, you are the Son of God, and they will recognize the people you would least expect to do so. So we get to this point today, and one of the things that I think is so beautiful about this text is how clear it is when it says where Jesus is now headed. You're at the midpoint of the gospel. Where are we going from here? Are we going to meander around and find our way? No, we are headed from this point in chapter 8 straight to the cross, to Jesus' suffering and death, and what he said today in today's gospel will be fulfilled. What he is asking of the disciples at this moment is to follow him. Follow him means something different than they previously thought. Following him now means that you will be walking towards the cross. Following Jesus will mean that Jesus, as Lord and Savior Messiah, will suffer at the hands of the chief priests, the scribes, and the Pharisees. That he will be crucified, he will die on the cross, and that he will rise again. Jesus, in the word in Greek there, translated in English, means must. The Son of Man must suffer these things. Must suffer. Because he's not choosing to do it, but he is fulfilling that which God would have us do. He must suffer these things. He must suffer these many things because we have sinned against God. Jesus must be rejected because we have rejected God. Jesus must die because we have chosen the way of death over life. Jesus must be raised again because he has no sin and death has no hold on him. You see, Jesus must do this because he desires to fulfill what his Father has asked him to do. How do you all respond to musts in your life? You must go to confirmation. You're happy, excited, aren't you? How about other musts? You must do this or you must do that. We kind of bristle against it, don't we? Because it's always the law that comes down on us. You see, when we became Christians, we realized that we were under the law, the Ten Commandments, and more so. We have this way that we believe that we should live our lives, but how easy has that been? It's not easy, is it? To forgive others as we've been forgiven? Not easy, is it? To love others as we've been loved? Not easy, is it? To do all the other things. That journey of being a Christian is one of difficulty. It is one of suffering too. Because life presents us all kinds of things that are so hard and that challenges our faith. And sometimes our faith even falters in the difficulties of life. We know those times. Well, today we realize that Jesus goes before us. That it is not us who will go to the cross, but it is Jesus who will go to the cross. And in his suffering and death, and then, as he says, his resurrection, right, our Easter morning, he will conquer death. He will conquer all those things. And then things will be in their right order and right place. So we continue our journey now in Lent to the cross. We turn our journey to Easter.